The last radio transmission from Ranger Station 11 came at 9:47 on a Tuesday evening in October. The voice belonged to David Maro, 23 years with the National Park Service. He had worked search and rescue operations across 4 states. He had found lost hikers in conditions that killed other searchers. He had recovered bodies from places that required helicopters and climbing gear to reach. He knew the park better than the maps did, because he had walked every trail, every ridge, every drainage hundreds of times over 2 decades. His final transmission was 4 words. They finally found me. Then static, then silence, then nothing for 11 years. David Maro was not a tourist who wandered off trail. He was not an inexperienced hiker who underestimated the terrain. He was the person other people called when someone went missing. He was the expert. He was the one who always came home. He did not come home. And the evidence found at Ranger Station 11 has never been explained. There is a category of missing persons that researchers rarely discuss, not because the cases are less disturbing than others, because they are more disturbing, because they undermine the explanations that make wilderness disappearances easier to accept. When a tourist vanishes, we can attribute it to inexperience. They did not know the terrain. They made poor decisions. They underestimated the conditions. These explanations provide comfort. They suggest that knowledge and preparation can prevent tragedy. But what happens when the missing person is the expert? What happens when a park ranger with decades of experience vanishes from a location they know intimately? What happens when a search and rescue professional disappears while looking for someone else? What happens when the person who trains others in wilderness survival cannot be found, despite searches that cover every inch of ground? These cases exist. There are more of them than the National Park Service acknowledges publicly. Rangers, maintenance workers, fire lookout operators, trail crew members, people who spend years in the same wilderness, who know every landmark and every hazard, who understand the terrain better than anyone. They disappear too. And when they do, the evidence is often stranger than anything found in tourist cases. Because these are people who should not get lost. These are people who would recognize danger. These are people whose experience should protect them. It does not protect them. This investigation examines cases of park employees who vanished under circumstances that their training and experience cannot explain. These are not stories of rookie rangers making mistakes. These are veterans, experts, people who had survived everything the wilderness could throw at them, until something threw something different. Subscribe now. Turn on notifications. The cases you are about to hear will change how you think about who is safe in the wilderness. The answer is no one. David Maro grew up in Ashland, Oregon, in the shadow of the Cascade Range. His father was a Forest Service firefighter. His mother worked as a backcountry nurse, providing medical care to remote communities accessible only by trail or helicopter. David spent his childhood in the woods, learning to navigate by landmarks before he could read a map, identifying animal tracks before he learned to write. He joined the National Park Service at 22, immediately after graduating from Oregon State University with a degree in forestry. His first posting was Mount Rainier, where he spent 4 years working trail maintenance and learning the fundamentals of search and rescue. His supervisors noted his unusual ability to read terrain. He could look at a topographic map and visualize the landscape in 3 dimensions. He could predict where lost hikers would go based on the psychology of panic and the physics of moving through difficult terrain. By his late 20s, David had transferred to search and rescue full-time. He worked at Yosemite, then Glacier, then Olympic. Each park added to his expertise. He developed techniques for tracking that other rangers studied and copied. He pioneered the use of probability mapping in search operations, creating mathematical models that predicted where missing persons would be found based on their last known location, physical condition, and the specific characteristics of the terrain. His success rate was remarkable. In 19 years of full-time search and rescue work, David had participated in more than 400 operations. He had personally located missing persons in 212 cases. The people he found were not always alive. But they were found. David brought closure to families when other searchers had given up. In 2002, David transferred to a national park in the Pacific Northwest. We are not naming the specific park because the case remains under investigation, and the family has requested privacy regarding certain details. What we can say is that David was assigned to a remote ranger station in the park's interior, accessible only by a 12-mile hike or helicopter. Ranger Station 11 had been built in the 1930s as a fire lookout and base for backcountry patrols. The station consisted of a small cabin with a radio room, a storage shed, and a helicopter landing pad. Rangers assigned to Station 11 typically worked 2-week rotations, monitoring trail conditions, responding to emergencies, and conducting routine patrols of the surrounding wilderness. David loved the assignment. After years of working high-profile rescues in crowded parks, he appreciated the solitude of Station 11. He told his wife Karen that the posting felt like coming home. The mountains reminded him of his childhood in Oregon. The isolation gave him time to think. For 11 years, David worked rotations at Station 11 without incident. He knew the surrounding terrain better than any living person. He had named landmarks that did not appear on official maps. He had discovered trails that had been abandoned for decades and forgotten by everyone except him. Rangers who worked with David said he could navigate the area in complete darkness, finding his way by the feel of the ground under his feet and the smell of different plant communities. On October 14, 2013, David began what should have been a routine 2-week rotation at Station 11. A helicopter dropped him at the landing pad at approximately 2 in the afternoon. The pilot, a contract aviator named James Chen, who had flown David to the station dozens of times, later told investigators that David seemed normal. They had talked about the weather forecast. David mentioned he was looking forward to some quiet time. He waved as the helicopter lifted off. That was the last time anyone saw David Moreau. The first indication that something was wrong came at 6:15 that evening. David was scheduled to check in with park headquarters via radio at 6 o'clock. When he missed the check-in, the dispatcher tried to raise him on the emergency frequency. No response. She tried again at 6:30. Nothing. Missing a radio check was unusual for David, but not unprecedented. Equipment malfunctions happened. Atmospheric conditions sometimes interfered with transmissions. The dispatcher logged the missed check-in and scheduled a follow-up for the morning. At 9:47 that evening, the radio at park headquarters crackled to life. The transmission was brief. David's voice calm but strange, not panicked, not urgent, almost peaceful. They finally found me. Then the signal cut out. The dispatcher immediately attempted to re-establish contact. She called David's identifier repeatedly for the next 3 hours. There was no response. At midnight, she woke the park superintendent and reported the situation. A search operation launched at first light on October 15th. The helicopter reached Station 11 at 7:20 in the morning. From the air, nothing appeared wrong. The cabin was intact. The storage shed was closed. No smoke, no debris, no signs of disturbance. The search team landed and approached the cabin. The door was open, not damaged, not forced, simply open, as if someone had walked out and not bothered to close it behind them. Inside, the cabin was orderly. David's gear was stowed properly. His sleeping bag was rolled and placed on the bunk. Food supplies were organized in the storage area. His rifle, which he carried for bear protection, was leaning against the wall beside the door. The radio was on. The frequency was set to the emergency channel. The microphone was hanging from its cord, swinging slightly in the draft from the open door. David was not there. The search that followed was one of the most intensive in the park's history. David was one of their own. Rangers from across the region volunteered for the operation. They covered every trail, every drainage, every ridgeline within a 20-mile radius of Station 11. Helicopters flew grid patterns until fuel budgets were exhausted. Dogs were brought in from 3 states. The dogs tracked David's scent from the cabin approximately 300 yards down the main trail toward a creek crossing. At the creek, the lead dog, a Belgian Malinois named Coda, who had worked over 100 successful tracks, did something his handler had never seen. Coda reached the water's edge, sniffed the ground twice, then turned around and walked back toward the handler. He sat down, looked up, and refused to continue. The handler tried 2 more dogs. Both exhibited similar behavior. They would track to the creek, stop, and disengage from the search entirely. One handler, a woman named Patricia Okonkwo, who had 18 years of experience, noted in her report that the dogs did not seem confused. They seemed unwilling, as if they understood something at that creek that humans could not perceive. The search continued for 16 days. Ground teams covered more than 200 square miles. Technical teams rappelled into canyons and climbed cliff faces that David might have accessed. Dive teams checked every body of water within the search radius. David Moreau was not found. No body, no clothing, no equipment, nothing except the open cabin, the hanging microphone, and the 4 words of his final transmission. They finally found me. The investigation that followed raised more questions than it answered. Analysis of the radio transmission revealed anomalies. The signal strength was inconsistent with a transmission from Station 11. The radio at the cabin had a maximum range of approximately 15 miles under ideal conditions, but the signal received at headquarters showed characteristics suggesting it had originated from much closer, perhaps within 5 miles of the receiving antenna. But there was nothing within 5 miles of headquarters except developed areas of the park, visitor centers, parking lots, maintained trails busy with tourists even in October. If David had been that close to headquarters, someone would have seen him. More troubling was the audio analysis of David's voice. Forensic specialists examined the transmission for signs of stress, coercion, or altered mental state. They found none. David's voice was calm. His speech pattern was normal. There was no indication he was injured, threatened, or confused. But there was something else. In the background of the transmission, barely audible beneath David's voice, analysts detected what they described as a low-frequency hum. The sound was not consistent with any known radio interference. It was not electrical noise or atmospheric disturbance. One analyst compared it to the resonance of a large enclosed space, like a cavern or a very large room. There are no caverns or large enclosed spaces anywhere near Station 11. The geology of the area does not support cave formation. Underground structures do not exist. The investigation interviewed everyone who had contact with David in the weeks before his disappearance. No one reported anything unusual. He had not mentioned feeling unwell or experiencing stress. He had not described seeing anything strange in the backcountry. He had been David. Competent, calm, professional David, who had spent 23 years in wilderness areas without incident. His wife Karen provided investigators with David's personal journals. He had kept detailed notes throughout his career, documenting interesting observations, unusual animal behavior, and thoughts about search and rescue methodology. The journals from his final months contained nothing alarming. Routine entries about weather, trail conditions, wildlife sightings. But Karen pointed out something that investigators initially dismissed. In his last 3 journal entries, all written during his previous rotation at Station 11 in September, David had used a phrase that he had never used before in decades of journaling. The phrase was feeling watched. September 8th, hiked to the upper basin today. Good conditions, feeling watched, but saw nothing unusual. September 11th, radio check normal, maintenance on the water system, feeling watched again, probably just the isolation. September 14th, last day of rotation, ready to go home. The feeling watched sensation has not gone away. Making note in case relevant later, David Maro was a rationalist. He did not believe in ghosts or supernatural explanations for wilderness phenomena. He had spent his career debunking myths about haunted forests and mysterious disappearances, explaining that most cases had logical explanations rooted in human psychology and environmental factors. For him to document a sensation of being watched 3 times in 1 week was out of character. Karen told investigators that David had not mentioned the feeling when he returned from that rotation. He had seemed normal, happy to be home, looking forward to his next assignment. 3 weeks later, he was gone. The case of David Maro remains officially open. The Park Service has never declared him dead, though he has been missing for more than 11 years. His family has not held a funeral. Karen still lives in the same house, still keeps his belongings in the closet, still answers the phone, hoping that somehow there will be news. There has been no news. Station 11 was decommissioned 2 years after David's disappearance. Official documentation cited budget constraints and changing operational needs. But rangers who worked in the park at the time tell a different story. They say no one wanted to staff the station anymore. They say the rangers who did rotations there after David vanished reported feeling uncomfortable, uneasy, watched. The station cabin still stands. It is not maintained. It is not staffed. Hikers who reach it report that it looks preserved, as if waiting for someone to return. The door is kept closed now, secured with a padlock that was installed after David disappeared. No official explanation has been given for why an unmanned cabin in the wilderness needs a lock. What did David Moreau mean when he said they finally found me? Who are they? Why did he say finally? As if he had been waiting for something or someone. Why was his voice calm? Why did the dogs refuse to track beyond the creek? What was the low-frequency hum in the background of his transmission? Where is David Moreau now? The second case occurred 5 years later in a different park, a different terrain, and under completely different circumstances. But it shares one element with David Moreau's disappearance that investigators have never been able to explain. Rachel Torres was 26 years old in June of 2018. She had worked for the National Park Service for just over 2 years, first as a seasonal interpretive ranger and then as a permanent law enforcement ranger at a park in the desert Southwest. Rachel was not a backcountry expert like David Maro. Her background was in criminal justice, not forestry. She had grown up in Phoenix, Arizona, surrounded by desert, but rarely venturing into wilderness areas until she took the Park Service job. She wanted meaningful work in beautiful places. The desert offered both. What Rachel lacked in wilderness experience, she compensated for with discipline. Her training officer described her as the most methodical ranger he had ever worked with. She followed protocols exactly. She documented everything. She never took shortcuts. During her probationary period, she had been teased for radioing her position too frequently, for requesting backup on calls that other rangers would handle alone, for treating every situation as if it might become an emergency. Her supervisor later told investigators that this was exactly why Rachel was assigned to routine backcountry patrols. She was careful. She was predictable. She was the last person who would take an unnecessary risk. On June 19, 2018, Rachel was dispatched to investigate a report of illegal camping in a restricted area. A helicopter pilot had spotted what appeared to be a tent during a routine overflight the previous evening. The location was approximately 4 miles from the nearest trailhead, in a zone closed to overnight camping due to sensitive archaeological sites. Rachel signed out at 7:45 in the morning, noting her route, her expected arrival time at the campsite, and her planned return time of 2 in the afternoon. She carried a radio, a GPS unit, 2 liters of water, a first aid kit, and standard law enforcement equipment. The temperature was already 87 degrees when she left the trailhead. It would reach 112 by mid-afternoon. Rachel made radio contact at 8:30 as scheduled. Position approximately 1.5 miles from trailhead. Conditions good. Core temperature stable. She radioed again at 9 o'clock, 2.5 miles out. Heat increasing but manageable. Water consumption on schedule. At 9:32, Rachel made her third transmission. She reported that she was approaching the coordinates where the tent had been spotted. She could see something ahead. She thought it might be the campsite. 3 minutes later, at 9:35, Rachel radioed again. Her voice was the same, professional, controlled, but her words were not. She said there was no tent. She said there was something else. The dispatcher asked her to describe what she was seeing. Rachel paused for several seconds before responding. She said it was difficult to explain. She said it looked like heat shimmer, the kind of visual distortion that appears above hot pavement or sand. But it was not moving the way heat shimmer moves. It was stationary, and it had edges. The dispatcher asked Rachel to clarify. Heat shimmer with edges made no sense. Rachel acknowledged this. She said she was going to move closer to get a better look. The dispatcher asked if Rachel wanted backup. Rachel said no. She said it was probably just an unusual atmospheric effect. She said she would investigate and report back in 15 minutes. That was her last transmission. When Rachel did not radio at 9:50 as expected, the dispatcher attempted to reach her. No response. She tried again every 5 minutes for the next half hour. Nothing. At 10:30, the dispatcher declared Rachel overdue and initiated search protocols. A helicopter reached the area where Rachel had been heading within 90 minutes. The pilots flew low patterns, scanning the terrain for any sign of a person. The desert was sparse vegetation and exposed rock, good visibility in all directions. They saw nothing. Ground teams arrived by early afternoon. They found Rachel's boot prints immediately. The sandy soil held tracks well in the dry conditions. The prints led from the main trail toward the coordinates of the reported campsite, exactly the route Rachel had described in her transmissions. The tracks continued for approximately 300 yards into a flat, open area. No rocks, no vegetation, no features of any kind. Just sand and dirt and heat. In the center of this open area, Rachel's footprints stopped. The final prints showed both feet together, parallel, facing northeast. The impression depth suggested Rachel had been standing still, not walking. Her weight was evenly distributed. She had stopped and stood in place. There were no other prints, no tracks leading away in any direction, no indication of a struggle, a fall, or any disturbance to the surrounding ground. The search teams expanded their radius. They walked circles around the point where Rachel's prints ended, looking for any continuation of the trail. They found nothing. The sand was undisturbed in all directions. It was as if Rachel had stood in that spot and simply stopped existing. The search continued for 11 days. More than 150 personnel participated. Helicopters with thermal imaging flew night operations when the heat was less intense. Tracking dogs were brought in, though handlers warned that the extreme temperatures would limit their effectiveness. The dogs tracked Rachel's scent from the trailhead along the same route as her footprints. At the point where the prints ended, the dogs did something unexpected. They did not lose the scent. Losing scent is common in desert conditions. Heat, wind, and low humidity disperse scent molecules rapidly. Handlers expected the dogs to struggle. Instead, the dogs tracked to the spot where Rachel's prints ended and began circling. Tight circles, no more than 10 feet in diameter, centered on the final footprints. They circled for several minutes, sniffing constantly, clearly detecting scent, but unable to determine a direction. Then all three dogs, within seconds of each other, pointed their noses straight up, toward the sky. The lead handler had worked search dogs for 14 years. She had never seen dogs indicate upward. Dogs track scent on the ground, in the air at nose level, occasionally on elevated surfaces like rocks or tree branches. They do not track scent that leads into the sky. The handler made note of the behavior in her report. She had no explanation for it. On the third day of the search, a team found Rachel's GPS unit. It was lying on the ground approximately 50 feet from where her footprints ended, partially covered by sand that had blown over it during the previous nights. The unit was functional. Data recovery showed Rachel's track from the trailhead to the point where she had stopped. The track ended at the same coordinates as her footprints. Everything matched. But the GPS had continued recording after Rachel stopped. For 4 hours and 12 minutes, the unit logged Rachel's position as stationary. The coordinates did not change. The unit sat in the desert, recording nothing, while search teams were already mobilizing. Then, at 1:47 in the afternoon, the GPS showed movement. The track that followed made no sense. In 12 minutes, the GPS traveled approximately 6 miles. The route was erratic, zigzagging across terrain that included deep washes, boulder fields, and a ridge formation that rose 300 feet above the surrounding desert. The path did not follow any trail or logical route. It crossed obstacles that would slow a hiker to a crawl. The average speed required to cover this distance in this time was approximately 30 miles per hour. On foot, through this terrain, such speed was physically impossible. At 1:59 in the afternoon, the GPS stopped. The final coordinates placed the unit at the base of a cliff formation in a remote section of the park, more than 6 miles from where Rachel had disappeared. Search teams reached the location the following morning. They found the GPS unit sitting on a flat rock, positioned upright, as if someone had placed it there deliberately. The unit was undamaged. The battery was nearly depleted, but still functional. There was no sign of Rachel. No footprints. No equipment. No indication that anyone had ever been at that location. The GPS data was analyzed by experts from 3 different agencies. All confirmed that the unit showed no signs of malfunction. The timestamps were accurate. The coordinates were precise. The movement data was genuine. Something had moved that GPS unit 6 miles across the desert in 12 minutes. Something traveling at 30 miles per hour through terrain that would challenge a vehicle. Rachel Torres was never found. The investigation explored every possibility. Animal predation was considered, but predators in the area, primarily mountain lions and coyotes, do not transport GPS units. They do not leave victims' belongings arranged on rocks miles from attack sites. Abduction was considered, but the logistics were impossible. The area where Rachel disappeared was miles from any road. No vehicles could access it. No tire tracks were found anywhere in the region. For a human to have taken Rachel, they would have needed to be waiting in the desert, on foot, in 100-degree heat, at a location with no shade or water, hoping that a ranger would happen to walk past. The illegal campsite that Rachel had been sent to investigate was never found. The helicopter pilot who reported seeing a tent reviewed his footage and photographs. He could not identify what he had seen. He said it might have been a trick of light. He said he was no longer certain he had seen anything at all. Rachel's parents established a foundation in her name. They visit the park every year on the anniversary of her disappearance. They hike to the area where her footprints ended and stand where their daughter last stood. They look at the empty desert. They look at the sky. They think about 3 dogs pointing their noses upward. They do not know what Rachel saw when she said it looked like heat shimmer, but was not moving right. They do not know what carried her GPS unit 6 miles in 12 minutes. They do not know where Rachel is now. 2 cases, 2 park employees, 2 people who knew their jobs and followed their training and disappeared in ways their training could not have prepared them for. David Maro, the veteran, 23 years of experience, hundreds of successful rescues, a man who could navigate wilderness in the dark by feel alone. Gone from a cabin he had used for over a decade, leaving behind 4 words that have never been explained. Rachel Torres, the newcomer, 2 years on the job, methodical and careful to a fault. A woman who radioed her position every 30 minutes and never took unnecessary risks. Gone from an open desert, her footprints ending in a place with no obstacles, no features, no explanation. The wilderness took them both. Experience did not matter. Caution did not matter. Being the expert or being the novice did not matter. Something in these places does not discriminate. It takes who it takes. In Part 2, we will examine 3 more cases. A fire lookout operator who left his tower without boots and 14 months later sent a photograph of himself from a mountain that does not exist. A trail maintenance supervisor who was found alive after 9 days missing, physically healthy, but carrying a mark on his body and words in his mouth that no one can identify. A maintenance worker who died of a heart attack and was found surrounded by his own tools arranged in a perfect geometric circle with no explanation for how they got there. The evidence in these cases is even more disturbing than what we have presented today. The questions become harder to dismiss. What is happening to the people who work in American wilderness? Why are the experts just as vulnerable as the tourists? What did David Maro mean when he said they finally found me? What did Rachel Torres see in the desert before she vanished? Why did the dogs point at the sky? Subscribe now. Turn on notifications. The wilderness does not care how much you know. The wilderness does not care how careful you are. The people who spend their lives in these places understand the risks better than anyone. They disappear anyway. But disappearance is not the only outcome. Some cases are stranger than simple vanishing. Some involve people who come back. Some involve messages from places that should not exist. Some involve evidence that suggests the wilderness operates by rules we have never encountered. On September 23, 2015, a package arrived at the administrative office of a national forest in Montana. There was no return address. The postmark indicated a post office in a town of 800 people, 40 miles from the nearest forest entrance. The package was not addressed to any specific person. It simply said, Forest Service Administration. Inside were 3 items: a United States Forest Service badge. The badge number belonged to Kevin Dalton, a fire lookout operator who had disappeared 14 months earlier. A Casio wristwatch, the model Kevin's ex-wife confirmed he always wore. The watch was running. The time was accurate. And a photograph. The photograph showed Kevin Dalton standing on a snow-covered mountain slope. He was smiling. Not forced, not coerced. He looked happy, relaxed, healthy. He was wearing clothes no one recognized, a heavy wool sweater and canvas pants that looked handmade. On the back of the photograph, 4 words were written in Kevin's handwriting. His ex-wife confirmed the handwriting. His former supervisor confirmed it. 3 separate analysts confirmed it. The words were, "Stop looking, I'm home." The photograph was analyzed extensively. The mountain in the background could not be identified. It did not match any peak in the national forest where Kevin had worked. It did not match any peak in Montana or Idaho or Wyoming. Analysts compared it to mountain databases from across North America and found no match. The snow coverage and vegetation suggested high elevation, perhaps 10 or 11,000 feet. The lighting indicated late afternoon in autumn. The shadows were consistent with a northern latitude. But the mountain did not exist, not in any database, not in any photograph, not on any map. Kevin Dalton had mailed his badge and watch from a small Montana town, attached a photograph of himself on an unidentifiable mountain, and asked people to stop looking for him. No one has seen him in person since. No one knows where he sent the package from or how he reached that post office. The building had no security cameras in 2015. No one remembered who had mailed the package. Kevin Dalton remains officially missing. To understand why this case disturbed investigators so much, you need to understand how Kevin Dalton disappeared in the first place. Kevin was 47 years old in July of 2014. He had worked for the Forest Service for 9 years, all of them as a fire lookout. Before that, he had worked as a long-haul trucker for 15 years. Before that, he had served 4 years in the Navy. He was not married. He had no children. He had few friends. He preferred it that way. People who knew Kevin described him as quiet, but not unfriendly. He spoke when he had something to say. He did not speak when he did not. He read constantly. History, philosophy, science. His lookout tower contained more than 300 books that he had carried up the mountain over the years. The tower Kevin staffed sat on a ridge at 7,200 feet. It was accessible by a 4-mile trail from a Forest Service road. During fire season, June through October, Kevin lived in the 14 by 14-foot cabin at the top of the tower, watching for smoke, reporting weather conditions, and maintaining the equipment that kept him connected to the outside world. On July 19, 2014, Kevin made his scheduled morning radio check at 0600. He reported clear skies, low humidity, and good visibility. Nothing unusual. At noon, he made his second scheduled check. He reported seeing a small smoke plume approximately 12 miles to the northeast. He provided coordinates. A helicopter was dispatched to investigate. The smoke turned out to be a legal campfire that had not been properly extinguished. Rangers dealt with it. At 1800, Kevin did not make his scheduled check. The dispatcher waited 10 minutes and tried to reach him. No response. She tried again at 1815. Nothing. At 1830, she contacted the district ranger and reported Kevin overdue. A ranger was dispatched to the tower the following morning. The 4-mile hike took approximately 2 hours. The ranger, a woman named Cindy Kowalczyk, arrived at the tower at 0840. She found the tower exactly as it should have been. The cabin door was closed. The windows were intact. The solar panels were functioning. The radio was operational. Kevin was not there. His personal belongings were present. Books on the shelves, clothes in the storage bin, food in the cabinet. His wallet was on the small desk beside his bunk, containing $43 in cash, his driver's license, and 2 credit cards. His boots were beside the door, the boots he wore every day, the boots he would need to descend the tower's 63 metal steps and walk anywhere. Cindy searched the tower and the immediate surroundings. She found no sign of Kevin. She found no sign of struggle, injury, or disturbance of any kind. She did find one thing that she could not explain. On the desk, beside Kevin's wallet, there was a piece of paper. On the paper, Kevin had written a series of numbers. Cindy photographed the paper and reported it to investigators. The numbers were 47.3851 by negative 124.6217. These are GPS coordinates. They point to a location in the Pacific Ocean, approximately 20 miles off the coast of Washington state. There is nothing at these coordinates. No island, no reef, no structure of any kind, just open water. No one knows why Kevin wrote these numbers. No one knows what significance they held for him. No one knows if they are connected to his disappearance. The search for Kevin covered the area around the tower extensively. His bootless condition limited how far he could have traveled on foot. The terrain was rocky and steep. Without boots, he would have been unable to walk more than a few hundred yards before injuring his feet. No trace of him was found. No footprints. No blood. No torn clothing. Nothing. 14 months later, a package arrived with his badge, his watch, and a photograph of him smiling on a mountain that does not exist. The handwriting was his. The photograph was recent, taken sometime during the 14 months he had been missing. He was alive when the photograph was taken. He appeared healthy and happy. He asked people to stop looking for him. He said he was home. Kevin Dalton's case file remains open. The Forest Service has never closed it. His ex-wife, a woman named Denise who lives in Billings, has the photograph framed on her mantle. She says she is glad he is happy, wherever he is. She says the Kevin she knew was never happy, not really. She says maybe he found whatever he was looking for. She does not know where the mountain is. She does not know how he got there. She does not know why he left his boots behind when he walked away from the tower. She has stopped asking. The coordinates Kevin wrote on the paper have been investigated. The ocean at that location is approximately 200 feet deep. There is nothing on the seafloor except sand and marine life. Divers found no wreckage, no structure, no anomaly of any kind. But researchers who study unexplained disappearances have noted something about the coordinates. They fall within an area of the Pacific that indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest considered sacred. Oral traditions speak of a place in the water where the boundary between worlds was thin, where people could pass through to somewhere else. These are legends. They are not evidence. But Kevin Dalton wrote those coordinates for a reason. He wrote them before he disappeared. And 14 months later, he sent a photograph of himself from a mountain that cannot be found on any map. Where is Kevin Dalton now? What did he mean by home? How did he leave a 63-foot tower without boots? Why did he write coordinates that point to empty ocean? We do not know. The second case is different from everything we have examined so far, because in this case, the missing person was found. On March 7, 2019, a trail maintenance supervisor named Eduardo Reyes was reported overdue from a solo inspection hike in a national park in New Mexico. He had signed out at 0700 for what should have been a 6-hour round trip to assess winter damage on a backcountry trail. When he had not returned by 1800, rangers initiated a search. The search continued for 9 days. On March 16th, a hiker on a trail 11 miles from where Eduardo had been working, in the opposite direction from the ranger station, found a man sitting on a rock beside the path. There was no logical route between the two locations. The terrain between them included a canyon that would require technical climbing equipment to cross. The man was wearing a Forest Service uniform. He appeared disoriented but physically unharmed. It was Eduardo Reyes. He was taken to a hospital in Albuquerque and examined. Doctors found no injuries, no frostbite, despite overnight temperatures that had dropped below freezing during his absence. No dehydration, despite 9 days in the wilderness without supplies. No malnutrition. His physical condition was consistent with a person who had been missing for a few hours, not 9 days. When investigators interviewed Eduardo about his experience, they encountered something unexpected. Eduardo could not remember anything, not fragments, not partial recollections, nothing. His last memory was signing out at the ranger station on March 7th. His next memory was sitting on the rock when the hike. The mark was approximately 3 inches long and 2 inches wide. It was not a scar. It was not a bruise. It was not a tattoo. It appeared to be a pattern of slightly raised skin, lighter than the surrounding tissue, in a geometric shape. The shape was a series of concentric circles intersected by straight lines radiating from the center. It looked deliberate. It looked designed. Eduardo had no memory of receiving the mark. Doctors could not explain what had caused it. It was not consistent with any known injury, skin condition, or medical procedure. Maria photographed the mark extensively. She showed the photographs to dermatologists, who were puzzled. She showed them to tattoo artists, who said the precision of the lines was beyond what could be achieved with any technique they knew. She showed them to researchers who study unexplained phenomena, who noted that the pattern resembled symbols found at certain archaeological sites around the world. The mark has not faded. It remains on Eduardo's shoulder blade today, 6 years after he was found. There were other changes. Before his disappearance, Eduardo spoke only English and Spanish. These were the languages of his childhood in El Paso, the languages of his education and career. After his disappearance, Eduardo began occasionally speaking words and phrases in a language no one recognized. It happened involuntarily. He would be in the middle of an English sentence, and suddenly a word would emerge that was not English or Spanish, a word with sounds that seemed foreign to both languages. Eduardo had no awareness of speaking these words. When family members pointed them out, he could not repeat them deliberately. Linguists who reviewed recordings of these episodes could not identify the language. It did not match any known language family. It did not match any constructed language. It did not match any documented indigenous language from North or South America. Eduardo returned to work 6 months after being found. His supervisors reported that his job performance was unchanged. He was the same competent, reliable employee he had always been. But his co-workers noticed differences. Eduardo had always been social. He ate lunch with colleagues. He participated in after-work gatherings. He talked about sports, about his children, about weekend plans. After his return, Eduardo preferred solitude. He ate lunch alone. He declined invitations. He seemed distracted, as if listening to something no one else could hear. When asked what he was thinking about, Eduardo would pause, consider the question, and say he did not know. He said it was like having a word on the tip of your tongue that you cannot quite remember. He said there was something in his mind trying to surface, something from those 9 missing days, but it never quite broke through. Eduardo Reyes still works for the Park Service. He still lives with Maria in the same house in Las Cruces. He still has no memory of the 9 days he was missing. The mark on his shoulder has not changed. The words in the unknown language still emerge occasionally. The sense that something is trying to surface has not gone away. His medical file contains a note from the psychologist who evaluated him after his return. The note reads, "Patient presents as psychologically stable, despite anomalous circumstances. No evidence of fabrication or delusion. Recommend continued monitoring. The monitoring has continued for 6 years. Nothing has changed. Nothing has been explained." Where was Eduardo Reyes for 9 days? How did he survive without food or water? What caused the mark on his shoulder? What language does he occasionally speak? What is trying to surface from those missing days? The third case does not involve a disappearance at all. It involves a death, but the circumstances of the death have never been explained, and the evidence left behind raises questions that investigators have been unable to answer. On November 3, 2016, a maintenance worker named Thomas Weaver was found dead in Shenandoah National Park in Virginia. His body was discovered by hikers approximately 200 yards off a popular trail in a small clearing surrounded by oak and hickory trees. Thomas was 58 years old. He had worked for the Park Service for 26 years. He was a week away from retirement. His wife Linda had already planned a party. His co-workers had collected money for a gift. His supervisor had prepared a certificate of appreciation. Thomas was found lying on his back in the center of the clearing. His eyes were open. His expression was peaceful. There was no visible injury, no blood, no signs of struggle. The medical examiner determined that Thomas had died of cardiac arrest, a heart attack, not uncommon for a 58-year-old man with a family history of heart disease. But the medical examiner also noted something unusual. Thomas's potassium levels were abnormally elevated. His sodium levels were abnormally low. These imbalances were consistent with extreme stress or physical exertion, but Thomas's body showed no other signs of either. His muscles were relaxed. His face was peaceful. He appeared to have simply laid down and stopped living. The medical examiner ruled the death natural causes, but added a note to the file. Physiological findings not entirely consistent with standard cardiac event. Recommend additional investigation. No additional investigation was conducted. Thomas was cremated according to his wishes. His ashes were scattered in the park where he had worked for 26 years, but his tools were not scattered. His tools were found in the clearing with his body, and they were arranged in a way that no one has been able to explain. Thomas had been repairing a section of fence along a boundary road when he disappeared. His work truck was parked on the road approximately 300 yards from where his body was found. The truck contained most of his equipment, but his hand tools, the ones he carried in a belt pouch, were not in the truck. They were in the clearing, arranged around his body. There were 7 tools: a hammer, a pair of pliers, a screwdriver, a utility knife, a tape measure, a small pry bar, a flashlight. The tools were arranged in a perfect circle around Thomas's body, evenly spaced, handles pointing outward. The circle was approximately 8 feet in diameter. Thomas lay in the exact center. Each tool was positioned with precision. The spacing between them was measured by investigators and found to be identical, within a 1/4 inch. The handles all pointed away from the body at exactly the same angle. The circle was geometrically perfect. Thomas Weaver was right-handed. His grip patterns were consistent across his tools, but the arrangement of the tools showed no grip marks consistent with recent handling. It was as if the tools had been placed by someone wearing gloves or by some means that did not involve human hands. Investigators considered the possibility that someone else had arranged the tools after Thomas died, but there were no other footprints in the clearing. The ground was soft from recent rain, and Thomas's boot prints were clearly visible leading into the clearing. No other prints led in or out. Thomas had walked into the clearing alone. He had died alone. And somehow, after or during his death, his tools had arranged themselves in a perfect circle around his body. His co-workers were interviewed about Thomas's habits. Did he have any rituals? Any superstitions? Any reason to arrange his tools in patterns? No one knew of any such behavior. Thomas was practical, methodical, boring in the way that reliable employees are boring. He did his job. He went home. He watched television with Linda. He went to sleep. He did not arrange tools in geometric patterns. He did not believe in anything that could not be measured with the instruments in his belt pouch. Linda Weaver was shown photographs of the tool arrangement. She did not recognize it. She said Thomas had never done anything like that. She said the pattern made no sense to her. But when she looked at the photographs longer, she began to cry. She could not explain why. She said the pattern made her feel something she could not name, something between fear and recognition, as if she was looking at something she should understand, but did not. Researchers who study unexplained phenomena have noted that the seven-pointed arrangement around Thomas's body corresponds to certain symbolic patterns found in various cultural traditions. But Thomas had no known interest in symbolism, mysticism, or any belief system that employed such patterns. The clearing where Thomas died has been visited by other park employees since his death. Several have reported feeling uncomfortable there. One maintenance worker refused to return after experiencing what he described as a sensation of being observed by something that was not visible. The Park Service has not officially acknowledged anything unusual about Thomas Weaver's death. The official cause remains cardiac arrest. The official explanation for the tool arrangement is that Thomas must have placed them himself, for reasons unknown, before he died. This explanation does not account for the lack of grip marks on the tools. It does not account for the geometric precision of the arrangement. It does not account for the fact that Thomas was dying of a heart attack and would have been in no condition to carefully arrange 7 tools in a perfect circle around himself. Linda Weaver still has Thomas's tools. She keeps them in a box in the garage. She has never arranged them. She has never touched them since they were returned to her. She says she cannot bring herself to move them. She says every time she looks at the box, she remembers the photographs of the clearing. She remembers the perfect circle. She remembers the feeling she could not name. She says she is waiting for something, but she does not know what. What happened to Thomas Weaver in that clearing? Why were his tools arranged in a perfect geometric pattern? How were they arranged without leaving grip marks or additional footprints? Why was his body in the exact center? What did Linda recognize when she looked at the photographs? 3 cases, 3 employees, 3 sets of evidence that do not fit any conventional explanation. Kevin Dalton, who vanished from a lookout tower without his boots and sent a photograph 14 months later from a mountain that does not exist. He wrote coordinates pointing to empty ocean. He said he was home. Eduardo Reyes, who disappeared for 9 days and was found with no memory, a geometric mark on his shoulder, and words in a language no one can identify. Something is still trying to surface from his missing time. Thomas Weaver, who died of cardiac arrest and was found surrounded by his own tools arranged in a perfect circle. No grip marks, no other footprints, no explanation. The wilderness does not release its secrets easily. The people who work in these places understand that better than anyone. They spend their careers in landscapes that existed before humans and will exist long after. Sometimes the landscape takes them. Sometimes it gives them back, changed. Sometimes it leaves behind evidence that suggests rules we do not understand, patterns we cannot interpret, intentions we cannot guess. Part 3 will examine 2 final cases: a ranger who disappeared while investigating another disappearance, and a group of 3 trail workers who vanished together, leaving behind a video camera with footage that has never been released to the public. The wilderness keeps its own records. The wilderness plays by its own rules, and the people who think they know these places best are often the first to learn how little they actually understand. What we have examined so far involves individuals, one person at a time, one disappearance, one set of unanswered questions. The final cases are different. They involve witnesses who watched people vanish. They involve footage that the government refuses to release. They involve an investigator who was sent to find answers and became part of the mystery instead. The file was labeled, "Do Not Distribute." It sat in a drawer in the superintendent's office at a national park in Washington state for 3 years before anyone outside the administrative staff knew it existed. The file contained interview transcripts, search reports, medical evaluations, and a single USB drive. The USB drive contained 47 minutes of video footage. The footage has never been released. No portion of it has been shared with media. No still frames have been published. The families of the 3 people in the video have been allowed to view it exactly once, under supervision, in a conference room at park headquarters. All 3 family representatives refused to discuss what they saw. 1. The mother of a 24-year-old trail worker named Jessica Huang collapsed during the viewing and required medical attention. She has not spoken publicly about her daughter's case since. The Park Service officially states that the video contains no information relevant to the investigation, and that releasing it would violate the privacy of the missing persons and their families. Researchers who have filed Freedom of Information Act requests for the footage have been denied. The denial letters cite an exemption rarely used in missing persons cases. The exemption covers materials whose release could reasonably be expected to endanger the life or physical safety of any individual. 3 people are already missing, presumably dead. What danger could a video pose to anyone now? The Park Service has not answered this question. What we know about the video comes from 2 sources: a partial transcript that was leaked to a researcher in 2021, and a single statement made by a Park Service official who viewed the footage and later resigned. The official, a woman who had worked in park administration for 18 years, gave an interview to a podcast that covers unexplained disappearances. She did not describe what was on the video. She said only one thing about it. She said, "I spent my career believing that the wilderness was indifferent, that it did not care about us one way or the other. After watching that video, I no longer believe that. The wilderness is not indifferent. It is aware, and it is patient." She resigned 2 weeks after viewing the footage. She now works for a private company in Seattle. She has declined all subsequent interview requests. Jessica Huang was 24 years old in September of 2018. She had worked for the Park Service for 2 summers as a seasonal trail maintenance worker. The job involved hiking to remote sections of trail and performing repairs, clearing fallen trees, replacing damaged signs, reinforcing eroded sections. It was hard physical work in beautiful places. Jessica loved it. She had grown up in San Jose, California, the daughter of Taiwanese immigrants who ran a small restaurant. She studied environmental science at UC Davis and spent her summers working in national parks. Her plan was to complete her degree and apply for a permanent position with the Park Service. She wanted to spend her life outdoors. Marcus Freeman was 29. He had worked trail maintenance for 5 years, the last 3 at this park. He was the crew supervisor, responsible for planning work schedules and ensuring safety protocols were followed. He was calm, experienced, and well-liked by everyone who worked under him. Daniel Kowalski was 22. It was his first summer with the Park Service. He had just finished his junior year at University of Montana, studying forestry. He was enthusiastic, but inexperienced. Marcus had taken him under his wing, teaching him the skills that could not be learned in a classroom. On September 14, 2018, the 3 of them hiked into the backcountry to assess damage on a trail that had been closed since a windstorm the previous winter. The trail was approximately 8 miles from the nearest trailhead, in a section of the park that received few visitors even during peak season. They signed out at 0700, noting their route and expected return time of 1800. Marcus carried a satellite communicator for emergencies. Daniel carried the video camera. The camera was Daniel's personal equipment. He had been documenting his first season with the Park Service, filming work activities, scenery, and interviews with co-workers. He planned to edit the footage into a short film for his portfolio. His professors had encouraged him to document professional experiences. No one objected to Daniel bringing the camera on the assessment hike. It was routine work. There was no reason to think anything would happen worth documenting. At 11:42, Marcus activated the satellite communicator and sent a check-in message. The message was brief. On site. Significant damage. Will need full crew for repairs. ETA unchanged. This was the last communication from the group. When they did not return by 1900, a ranger drove to the trailhead to check if their vehicle was still there. It was. The ranger radioed headquarters and reported the group overdue. A search began the following morning. The trail the group had been assessing was found without difficulty. The damage Marcus had reported was visible. Several large trees had fallen across the trail. Erosion had washed out a section near a creek crossing. The assessment appeared incomplete. Flagging tape that crews used to mark work areas was partially deployed, as if the group had started their evaluation, and then stopped. Their equipment was found approximately 200 yards off-trail, in a small clearing surrounded by old-growth forest. 3 backpacks, arranged in a row. 3 hard hats, placed on top of the packs. 3 pairs of work gloves, folded neatly beside the hats. The satellite communicator was in Marcus's pack, undamaged and functional. Daniel's video camera was found 30 feet from the packs, lying in a patch of ferns as if it had been dropped or thrown. The camera was still functioning. The battery was nearly depleted, but the memory card was intact. Park officials reviewed the footage that evening. What they saw caused them to immediately restrict access to the video and classify the file. The partial transcript that leaked in 2021 covers approximately the first 30 minutes of footage. The final 17 minutes have never been described by anyone who has viewed them. The transcript begins with routine footage, Daniel filming the hike-in, the scenery, conversations with Marcus and Jessica, normal work activities. At approximately the 22-minute mark, the group reaches the damaged section of trail and begins their assessment. At 26 minutes, according to the transcript, Jessica says something off-camera. The transcript records her words as, "Do you guys hear that?" Marcus responds, "Hear what?" Jessica, "That sound. Like humming." Marcus and Daniel both say they do not hear anything. The transcript notes that the audio track at this point contains no unusual sounds. At 28 minutes, Jessica is visible on camera. She has stopped working and is looking toward the forest to the north. The transcript notes her expression as focused, but not alarmed. Daniel asks her what she is looking at. Jessica does not respond. At 29 minutes, Jessica begins walking toward the tree line. Marcus calls after her, asking where she is going. Jessica does not respond. She does not turn around. Marcus tells Daniel to keep filming. He follows Jessica into the trees. The transcript notes that Daniel follows with the camera. The footage shows Jessica and Marcus walking through the forest. They are not on any trail. They are moving between trees, stepping over fallen logs, pushing through undergrowth. At 31 minutes, Jessica stops. She is standing in a small clearing. Marcus catches up to her and asks what is happening. Jessica's response, according to the transcript, is, "They want us to leave the camera." Marcus asks who wants them to leave the camera. Jessica does not answer. She looks at something off-frame. The transcript notes that her expression changes. It does not describe how. At 32 minutes, Daniel's voice is heard from behind the camera. He sounds frightened. He says, "What is that?" The transcript does not describe what he is referring to. At 33 minutes, the footage becomes unstable. The transcript notes rapid movement, blurred images, audio distortion. Voices are audible, but words cannot be distinguished. The final entry in the leaked transcript is at 34 minutes. It records a single phrase spoken by Marcus Freeman. The phrase is, "It's okay. I understand now." His voice is described as calm. The transcript ends there. The remaining 13 minutes of footage have never been described. The search for Jessica, Marcus, and Daniel continued for 23 days. More than 200 personnel participated. Dogs tracked scent from the clearing where the packs were found, but exhibited behavior similar to cases we have documented previously. They followed the trail for a short distance, then refused to continue. One dog, a German shepherd named Atlas, who had worked search and rescue for 7 years, was found the following morning approximately 1 mile from where his handler had last seen him. Atlas had somehow slipped his harness during the night and traveled through the forest alone. When found, he was sitting at the base of a large cedar tree, staring upward into the branches. His handler reported that Atlas was unresponsive for several minutes. When he finally acknowledged her presence, he would not leave the tree. She had to carry him out. Atlas was retired from search work after this incident. His handler said he was never the same. She said he developed a habit of staring at things that were not there. She said he would sometimes howl at night for no apparent reason. Jessica Huang, Marcus Freeman, and Daniel Kowalski were never found. No bodies, no clothing, no equipment beyond what was discovered in the clearing. The video camera remains in Park Service custody. The 47 minutes of footage remains classified. The families have been given no explanation for what happened. They have been given no explanation for why the video has not been released. They have been told only that the investigation is ongoing and that releasing the footage could compromise potential future developments in the case. There have been no developments in 6 years. What did Jessica hear that Marcus and Daniel could not? What did she see that made her walk into the forest? What was in the clearing that frightened Daniel? Why did Marcus say he understood? What is in the final 13 minutes of video? Why does the Park Service believe releasing the footage could endanger someone? We do not know. The final case brings the investigation full circle. It involves a ranger who was sent to investigate a disappearance and became a disappearance himself. Nathan Cross was 41 years old in August of 2020. He had worked for the National Park Service for 16 years, the last 8 as a special investigator attached to the Investigative Services branch. His job was to look into incidents that exceeded the capacity of individual parks to handle. Serious crimes, complex accidents, unexplained events. Nathan had a reputation for closing difficult cases. He had solved a string of equipment thefts that had baffled rangers for 2 years. He had identified the cause of a series of unexplained injuries on a popular trail. He had pieced together what happened to a missing hiker when all physical evidence suggested the person had never existed. In August of 2020, Nathan was assigned to investigate a disappearance at a national park in the Sierra Nevada. A volunteer trail maintenance worker named Roberto Vega had vanished 3 weeks earlier under circumstances that the park's staff could not explain. Roberto's case had unusual elements. He had disappeared from a section of trail visible from a fire lookout tower. The lookout on duty that day, a woman named Patricia Sung, had been watching the trail through binoculars when Roberto vanished. She reported that he had been walking normally one moment and was simply not there the next. No fall, no stumble, no movement off trail. He was there, and then he was not. Patricia's account was considered unreliable by initial investigators. She must have looked away. She must have been mistaken about what she saw. People do not simply vanish in plain sight. Nathan was assigned to the case because the park superintendent wanted a fresh perspective. Patricia was a credible witness with 12 years of experience. Her account deserved serious consideration. Nathan arrived at the park on August 3rd. He reviewed the case files, interviewed Patricia extensively, and hiked to the section of trail where Roberto had disappeared. He spent 3 days examining the area, taking photographs, making notes. On August 7th, Nathan sent an email to his supervisor at the regional office. The email was later entered into evidence in the investigation into Nathan's own disappearance. It read, "Something is wrong here. I don't mean that figuratively. I mean something is physically wrong with this location. I've been doing this work for 8 years, and I have never experienced anything like what I'm feeling at this site. I'm going to spend another day investigating, but I wanted to document my impressions in case they become relevant. The last line of the email read, "Patricia wasn't mistaken. I think she saw exactly what she described. I just don't know what that means yet." On August 8th, Nathan hiked to the trail section alone. He signed out at 06:30, noting that he expected to return by 1400. At 09:15, Patricia Sung was on duty at the fire lookout. She was scanning the area with binoculars as part of her routine observations. She saw Nathan on the trail, approximately 200 yards from where Roberto had vanished. She watched him walk. She watched him stop. She watched him turn and look at something in the forest to his left. The forest on that side was dense. There was no trail, no feature, nothing that should have attracted attention. She watched Nathan take a step toward the trees. She watched him take another step. Patricia picked up her radio to call park headquarters. She wanted to report Nathan's deviation from the trail. She wanted someone to know where he was going. In the 3 seconds it took her to key the radio and speak, Nathan Cross vanished. Patricia looked back through her binoculars. The trail was empty. The forest where Nathan had been walking was empty. She scanned the entire visible area. Nathan was not there. Patricia's radio call brought rangers to the area within 2 hours. They found Nathan's pack beside the trail, approximately 20 feet from where Patricia had last seen him. The pack contained his investigation files, his camera, his satellite phone, his food and water. His footprints were visible in the dirt. They led from the trail toward the tree line. They stopped approximately 15 feet into the forest, in the middle of a small open area between trees. The footprints did not continue. There were no other prints. There was no indication of what had happened after Nathan took his final step. Nathan Cross has been missing for 5 years. His case is officially open. The investigation into Roberto Vega's disappearance was suspended indefinitely after Nathan vanished. The Investigative Services Branch sent 3 additional investigators to the park in the months following Nathan's disappearance. All 3 reported feeling uncomfortable at the site. One described a sensation of being watched. Another reported hearing sounds he could not identify. The third, a veteran investigator with 22 years of experience, requested reassignment after spending less than 48 hours at the park. His request memo contained a single sentence of explanation. "I do not believe this case can be solved by conventional investigative methods. The section of trail where Roberto and Nathan disappeared has been closed to the public since September of 2020. The closure is attributed to erosion damage requiring extensive repair. No repair work has been conducted. No timeline for reopening has been provided." Patricia Sung still works at the fire lookout. She has been offered transfers multiple times. She has declined them all. She says she needs to keep watching. She says she needs to see if anyone else walks toward the trees. She says she needs to understand what she saw. What did Nathan Cross see in the forest that made him leave the trail? What happened in the 15 feet between his last visible footprint and the open area where his tracks ended? Why did Roberto Vega vanish in plain sight? Why did 3 experienced investigators feel unable to continue working the case? What is in that forest that takes people? We have now examined 7 cases of Park Service employees who disappeared or died under circumstances that their training could not explain. David Maro, who sent a 4-word radio transmission and vanished from a cabin he had used for 11 years. Rachel Torres, whose footprints ended in open desert and whose GPS recorded impossible movement. Kevin Dalton, who left a lookout tower without boots and mailed a photograph from a mountain that does not exist. Eduardo Reyes, who was found after 9 days with no memory, a geometric mark, and words in an unknown language. Thomas Weaver, who died surrounded by his own tools arranged in a perfect circle. Jessica Huang, Marcus Freeman, and Daniel Kowalski, who filmed something in the forest that the Park Service refuses to release. Nathan Cross, who investigated a disappearance and became one himself. These people were not tourists. They were not inexperienced visitors who made fatal mistakes. They were professionals who spent their careers in wilderness. They understood the risks. They followed the protocols. They knew the terrain. The wilderness took them anyway. The National Park Service employs approximately 20,000 people. The vast majority serve their entire careers without incident. They do their jobs. They protect the land and the visitors. They go home to their families. But a small number encounter something that their training did not prepare them for. Something that operates outside the rules they learned. Something that takes people regardless of their experience, their preparation, their knowledge of the terrain. The Park Service does not publicize these cases. The statistics are buried in aggregate data. The files are classified or restricted. The video footage is locked away. The families are left with questions. The co-workers are left with unease. The wilderness keeps its secrets. If you work in wild places, you have probably felt it at some point. The sensation of being watched when no one is there. The sound that does not match any animal you know. The moment when the forest feels different than it did a second ago. Most of the time, nothing happens. The sensation passes. The sound fades. The forest returns to normal. But sometimes it does not. Kevin Dalton wrote coordinates to empty ocean and said he found home. Marcus Freeman said he understood now. Patricia Sung is still watching. Something is in the wilderness that we do not understand. Something that the people who know these places best are not immune to. Something patient. Something aware. We do not know what it is. We do not know what it wants. We only know that it takes people. Rangers and tourists. Veterans and newcomers. The experienced and the inexperienced. The wilderness does not discriminate. Subscribe now. Share this video. Leave a comment if you have worked in wild places and experienced something you cannot explain. The investigation continues. The evidence accumulates. The questions remain unanswered. And somewhere, in the forests and mountains and deserts of America, the wilderness is still watching. It has always been watching. It is patient, and it is not done.